This is a Cubase file that I finished yesterday for a TV show, and I've erased or changed things that might give away any spoilers or anything like that. But I just thought it would be a good starting point to go over my new template. I had a very large template before. It was getting close to 4,000 tracks, and I've even spoken to some people at Steinberg about it, and they said that they'd never heard of anyone ever having a template that large, and I understand why now, because as I got closer to 4,000 tracks, I started to get all kinds of menu and mixing board and just interface glitches where things would disappear, colors wouldn't appear the way they should be, and I realized it was probably a good time to start pulling tracks. So I'm going to go over the Cubase side of my template first, and then probably in another episode I will go over the VE Pro side of the template, because pretty sure all of these tracks' source exists on my slave computers. So I always have Piano Tech, love it, that hasn't changed at all. These are the live tracks that I have as defaults. So if I need to use, say, a staccato guitar part, I just hit X, which is my shortcut for disabling and enabling the instruments, and then everything's here. But if I hit X again and it's grayed out, then basically it's turned off, so it's not taking up any processing power. So these are just tracks that I've recorded before, and it's going to have things on it that I've used for processing. Sometimes not that big of a deal. Other times there might be more processing involved. But it's just a good starting point for me, which is honestly the way I think templates should be. They should be a starting point. They shouldn't limit you to anything. It should be a jumping off point for whatever project it is you're working on. So those are my live tracks. This is VPS Avenger, which is just an amazing, amazing synth that I've discovered, and I've been using a lot, especially for TV. That's what it looks like. And I've got a kind of a classic skin on it right now, but it's a really, really powerful synth that can do lots of things and just sounds really, really great out of the box. It reminds me a lot of Zebra. It does wavetable synthesis, but it also does granular synthesis and sampling and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I have that here at the top because I'm usually using some of the kits and some default patches that I've either made or edited from presets that I know work really well. And then Woodwinds, basically I have Spitfire and Berlin. And there are other Woodwind libraries that I have on my hard drives, and I can always pull them up as a separate instance. These are basically just the default go-to patches. And I've also cleaned out a lot of the articulations. I used to have every articulation loaded, and I've just realized over time that I don't use them. Basically what I use are legatos, staccatos, which are kind of like a medium short, and then the staccato shorts, which are even shorter. So it's all the Berlin Woodwinds with those three articulations. And same thing with the Spitfire. I've culled those quite a bit, just down to legatos, flutters, marcatos, and staccatos. Again, all the other ones are still over there on the hard drive. I just don't have them in the template because the honest truth was I never went to them and I never used them. And if it's been a year and I haven't used something, it's going out. I'm all about efficiency. Holly Woodwinds, some really great stuff there. And that's it for the Woodwinds. Short and sweet. Brass. We've got the Berlin brass, which again, legato, portato, shorts, and runs. I think that's the extensive list of articulations within Berlin. It's just a matter of those are individual horns, here's the four horns, individual trumpets, individual trombones, and low brass. And then the Spitfire brass, same thing. This is significantly shorter just because I've reduced a lot of these articulations I never ended up using. Legatos and shorts, that's pretty much all I have on there. And of course, feel free to pause this video and look at all the specific patches if you want. These are my personal brass libraries, which each one of these has probably 7 or 8 key switches built into it, so it's actually 7 or 8 different articulations across the ensemble. And then these are just the shorts, so I can have them on a separate line MIDI-wise from all the other articulations that get key switched. A lot of times I'm using longs and shorts so I can keep them separate like this. And then these are horn effects that I had sampled. Now this says SM brass, which is supposed to be sample modeling brass, which is basically, these folders are how I recall the visibility configuration so I can view certain things. And I'm going to go over Metagrid and all my shortcuts and visibility configurations in another episode coming up very soon. But this is the sample modeling brass, which is still really useful, I think. And then this last one is slightly misnamed. It says Adventure brass. It started out as Adventure brass, but now it's got the play brass in it. Again, limited sustains, legatos, or staccatos, because that's all I seem to be using lately. Here is the original patches that were in this folder, the Adventure and Trailer brass. And then we get to Forza, which I actually do have all of the articulations loaded. But that's only because I worked on the library with Heavyocity. We came up with the articulations together, and they're kind of exactly the sort of thing that I would want to use. So I have all of them here, organized by section, and then the ensemble stuff down here at the bottom. Orchestral percussion is broken up either by the play orchestral percussion, which works really great for TV because it was recorded on a smaller stage. You can get kind of punchy and dry. This is a TV cue, so you notice I'm using the play percussion here. Then the Spitfire percussion, a selection of all their things. This is flying hand percussion, really great mallets, and then Cinesamples percussion here. The harp, I believe, is Spitfire harp. And I've got some other ones like the Orchestral Tools harp and I believe the Cinesamples harp as well. This is the one that I default to, but I can pull the other ones up on a separate contact instance if I want to. So you notice I've got blue and green. It's just color coding, so when you see this over here, it makes sense for me visually to understand what's going on. The colors don't mean anything other than that they're grouping similar instruments together. Symphonic strings is probably, yep, that's it. Again, shorter. So I've just got it grouped like violin 1, violin 2, violas. I don't like using key switching. I don't particularly want to use any of the fancy Cubase key switches and key maps and things like that. I like having everything on its own track. It makes it easier if I have to send it to Paul, my music copyist, editor, assistant extraordinaire, for everything to be on its own track, just so that visually he can see what's going on. And honestly, for me, it makes more sense for me to be able to see what's going on as well, instead of just saying violins 1 and then having all of these things as key switches and just seeing this MIDI data that says violins 1. I can tell by where the data exists if it's the flautando or the tremolo or the spiccato. It's just more clear to me. And even with all the extra tracks I have as a result of not using key switches, I'm still only at 1600 tracks, which is literally half of what I had in my other template, less than half as a matter of fact. So as much as I can, these get mirrored across the section. So if Sulpant is channel 5, down here Sulpant's going to be channel 5, Sulpant's going to be channel 5. Not only are they in order, but I can also just copy MIDI data from one track to another without worrying about if it's matching up correctly, because I know that they're all the same across the sections. This is Spitfire symphonic strings, by the way. This is Spitfire chamber strings, which is still one of my favorite string libraries, hands down, because it's a smaller ensemble. I just really like the way it sounds. Again, same articulations across all 5 sections. 2 different legatos, standard legatos, and then all these wonderful other legatos that work really, really well. And then Cinematic Studio strings, which probably ties with Spitfire for my favorite string library. I love how it's a little darker and a little drier, and I really love the way it's simple. You've got that little grid of, what, 8 different articulations. Now I have them sussed out individually on MIDI tracks, as I explained before, because I like being able to see, for example, if we move over here, where my tremolo strings are versus my trills. And I also love the way Cubase labels them, so I can see on the MIDI data itself, well, here's the tremolo and here's the trill. And normally I have this view optimized so only tracks with MIDI are being shown, and I can see the entire project in more or less one screen. Sometimes I have to scroll, but a lot of times I end up grouping all the sustains together, all the trems together, the harmonics, the shorts. Now see, from here down, this is broken out: violin 1, violin 2, viola, cello, bass. A lot of times with libraries I use a lot, it's great to have the similar articulation grouped with all 5 sections together. So if I want to do something like this, literally I will play this in first and then copy it down here, edit the note, copy it down here, edit the note, and I'm not having to look the way it is here, where it's all spread out. I've ended up using these trills a lot actually, and I'll probably end up putting them up here in a similar grouping as I do with the tremolos and the sustains. And then this is the grab bag folder. So right now at the top is all of the play, go back to the beginning, all of the play instruments, which honestly has some of the best sounding legato I've heard. I haven't had play for very long. I got it maybe 6 months ago. And it is a very nice legato patch. And their staccatos, especially the spiccatos, are also really, really fast and sharp. I like them a lot. So that's the play. What else is down here? Then we've got soaring strings down here at the bottom, which is a beautiful, full, multi-vibrato sort of thing. Novo, I still use, but I've got it in my contact instruments down here at the bottom. I pull it up through there instead of keeping it in the string template itself. These are my strings, the IO, which is the Imperfect Orchestra, registered trademark coming soon, strings. So I've got, you know, unisons and shorts and staccatos, and then all the effects. So violin 1, violin 2, these are all mirrored the same way, where I got effects across each section the same. So I can literally just grab my MIDI data, maybe switch it up or down an octave, and they'll all work the same way. And then the cellos and the basses. That's it for the strings. Hans Zimmer drums, really, really great. I've talked about them before. Those are all the Hans Zimmer drums. I especially use the big ones, but the individual solo drums are also really nice. So they're all grouped together that way. And then the master sessions, which is Heavyocity, pretty much have, well, everything that Heavyocity ever made. So I've taken all of their master sessions, starting with Damage up here. I just called it Master Sessions as a general folder. And then we've got the Master Sessions toms, the ethnic, the metal, and down here I believe is the wood. So that's every single playable instrument. These are not loops. These are all playable instruments from Master Sessions. And then the last percussion folder right there is Tone Hammer. They still really work well. The Epic stuff is really, really nice. The Arc percussion from Metropolis Arc 3, I believe. This is Strike Force. I actually have, that's slightly old. I've got a couple of tom tracks that I use and a couple of metal tracks and a couple of snare tracks. Not this many. I've got about 6 tracks from Strike Force, but this is obviously from an older template. And that's it for percussion. Now this is all Heavyocity stuff. It's just a question of how I categorized it. So the Evolve stings, there were, what, 2 or 3, I think, Evolves that came out. These are all the stings that they had in all of the instruments. And I just have them coming back into maybe 3 or 4 stereo pairs, not individually like they used to be. But they're just super useful. It's one of those things, if I can click on this and play it, especially probably half of these, I know exactly what they sound like. So I know when I'm looking for it, what I'm going to pick, what it's going to sound like, and how it's going to work in the track. It's a lot easier for me to find the track here than it is to go to my contact instance down here, pop it open, scroll over, find it on the other computer, load it into contact, just change my outputs, and this way everything's ready to go. Same thing with the hits. I use these a lot, and it's anything from, these are Aeon, I believe. It was just called a single hit like Aeon hits, and it was a keyboard of hits that you could tune at the bottom octave, and I just did a patch basically for each pitch, and this way I can just click it. I know that's going to be an A, and I take off and use what I want to use. These are all from Damage. amazing things. These are all from Gravity, also amazing. They're basically menus. I think this stuff is maybe Gravity. We'll see more when we go on the actual VE Pro session, because I'm going to scroll down through everything. And this is obviously just the MIDI overview, but I'm pretty sure all of these have their own returns individually, coming from VE Pro. So the two red ones are more like sound design-y kind of things. And then everything that's left is either synthesizers or just VST Instrument returns. This is probably my go-to for any synths right off the top. The Yuhi stuff. So I've got, these are individual instances. That's Hans Zimmer, that's the Dark Zebra basically, and then Hive, Repo 1, and Repo 5. So everything is blank. They're just waiting to be done and kind of a preset to be chosen, except for this one, which I use all the time. Basically a big fat sine wave. And I believe I have it EQ'd a little bit so that there's nothing, nothing coming out of the top and just the low end. So I'll put that and disperse it. I think that's the name of the patch, Whom. It was a good starting point, but I'll disperse it just under key moments like here and here. I'm sure these are big crescendos, you know, orchestra 2D, like long triple goose egg crescendos into the next scene, and I'll use this as the sub bass essentially. Now some of these folders are not quite true because I set them up for my visibility configurations, so I could say, I want to see Serum or Synthmaster. I had to name the folder something, and I've added things since then. Serum is amazing. Synthmaster is amazing. This Tal Uno, also equally amazing. It's like a great classic Roland kind of thing. And then this is Nexus, which is also great. This particular patch, I just use all the time. It's this dark, wonderful kind of syrupy sort of sound. And I have to admit, I haven't used a lot of Spectrasonics in games because I couldn't figure out exactly how to make them work. But for trailers and film and TV, they are absolutely amazing. So I have 2 instances of Omnisphere, and then 4 instances of Trillion, which I default to an acoustic and electric bass, which are really, really great. And then all these instances of RMX, it's 2 instances, but these are presets, so the hats and the shakers and the cymbals and everything's set. So all I have to do is hit this, and they're all different kinds of menus, and I can adjust my volume. And with RX, I have the mod wheel set to the filter, so if I want it to be a little less bright, I adjust the mod wheel, and everything's ready to go. If it says something like 16ths on it, then it's playing a 16th pattern. If it just doesn't say anything, then they're single hits across the menu. So really, really useful. This folder gets a lot of use in TV especially. This is an action cue, so there wasn't a lot of need for it. Usually it's mostly orchestra with some, you know, like high ticky support, which I end up using Heavyocity for normally. And then native instruments, again, they're just, except for that guy right there, they're just sitting there waiting to be used. Of course, I have all my unfinished presets ready to go. Now this is 3 instances of Contact pre-configured with individual outs on everything for audio. And I've got a Revolution drum machine, which is amazing. They've got a great 808 kick, so I can play the kick across the keyboard and kind of pick any pitch that I want. Well, it's really nice when you have something like this and you want the pitch to follow the chords. And we go to F sharp here, and we're on F sharp. We drop down to D. I don't need to worry about using MIDI to tune anything. I just kind of pitch track with MIDI. It helps a lot. And then this is a particular DM307. I just used it to kind of flesh out the ticky top ends. But these are all normally blank except for this one. And I pull up what I want. They don't have any routing, so I can assign the routing depending on what kind of sound I'm going to use. And really, this is anything but orchestra. So all my libraries are on there. They're all on my first slave machine under the Synth VE Pro session. And I can pull up, you know, drums or synths or even more orchestra sounds if I want to, something different that isn't in the template up here. It's basically a catch-all for everything. Now I had a JGMO2, which was Contact instances on my second slave, but I never used it, so I just went ahead and ditched it, you know, no problem. These are the other 2 local instances. I just like to have a local instance of Omnisphere just just in case. And then these are the, right now it looks like they're from Tycho Roll's Hybrid Tools swooshes. There's also tons of stuff from Gravity that I'll put in here as WAV files. Plus I'll use Rise from Native Instruments. I've got those exported as WAV files and I'll import them in here. When you have these long drawn out kind of things, it's a lot easier to see where it is and line it up visually than it is to try to use the MIDI. I lose patience with that really, really quickly. So here are the effects channels, which is mostly orchestra returns. And then all my group tracks, which again has been simplified considerably just because the 3-tiered stage I had before was working great. And I love the flexibility and the granularness of it, but I never ended up using kind of that first or second stage. I was always exporting at the 3rd stage, which is the last one. So it made more sense just to say, okay, I'm going to just use the general ideas here, and from that, it's going to be real easy for me to be able to select stems. And it also cut down on my routing, it cut down on my group tracks. It makes exporting things a lot easier, because when I pull up the export window in Cubase, I only see those tracks. And these are just my inputs and outputs that I have configured at the moment. Look, there I am in real time talking. I've got 32 ins and outs, but I only configure 16. So the one that I didn't get to is the VST Instruments, which is just the individual returns of everything that's coming from my VE Pro sessions on the slave machines. But they are considerably less than they used to be. So I've got a Winds, only one Wind VE Pro session instead of 2, and I've cut them down to core, just high, move my high, long and short, low, long and short, and effects. And then horns, trumpets, low brass, and effects, broken up into long and short. That's it. That must have taken, I mean, I had individual outputs for every single library, and you know, I had 3 or 4 libraries of just woodwinds and 3 or 4 libraries of brass. So this was getting in the hundreds of returns, and I've cut it down to whatever that is, you know, 12. Same thing with the strings. I only have high, long and short, low, long and short, and then a little bit with effects and a solo. I hadn't gotten around to putting play on my proper computer. Play is actually, the brass and percussion are supposed to be under winds, and percussion, which is down here. But I didn't have a new iLock, and I couldn't move the license, so I had to keep it on my one machine that did have a new iLock. I'm going to do that once TV season is over. So these will all move somewhere else, and the string returns will be equally short. That's the winds and the strings. The synth is still very, very long because I want to make sure that I have individual control and the ability to EQ and add effects to each individual synth return. So for every MIDI channel that there's a synth, there is a stereo return where it comes back. So this is all of the stuff that you saw at the top. They're all coming back as individual returns. The drums are not quite as specific. They're slightly less granular. So I kind of did HZ is Hans Zimmer, HY is Heavyocity, TH is Tonehammer, and I grouped them accordingly. So there's probably anywhere from 4 to maybe 10 or 12 different instruments coming back on these returns. But I tried to classify them in general, like a low, a high, a metal, you know, maybe they're low, high, metal, and wood, impacts, tails. It's definitely less specific than it was before, but only a little bit. I think it's still important, especially those are all the stings that I had listed before. I have got them broken out so that they each come back on their individual channel. This was the gravity stings, like the metal reverses, metal whooshes, atonal reverses, things like that. And that is the general overview of the template, but I can show you real quick what that looks like here on my mixing board. It scrolls off a little bit to the right, but the general idea is I have this set up. These are my orchestra returns, and this is all of them. And I can see them all in one go, which is really, really nice. These are all my drum returns, and I do have to scroll the tiniest bit, because I have all these gravity stings down here, but I thought it was important to have them broken out. And there's very little effects, because the idea is I will tweak it as needed. These are my synth returns. Now, since this is an active session from a cue yesterday, I have some things on the synths, but you can see it's just general returns of all the inputs. And I have Contact on its own mixing board just because the synths were getting too long and I didn't want to have to scroll. I like the idea of being able to see everything in a single screen. So those are my first, first 24 Contact returns. Usually I don't get any higher than that. I've got the third Contact instance with all 16 channels there. I have yet to have hit it. So it's kind of a diminishing returns after that. And then those are all my effects. More or less the same 224. You can see they're all coming from specific inputs and going to specific outputs. And then those are my groups, with a little bit mostly just rolling off some bottom end on things where you don't need to have any bottom end. That's the general overview of Cubase, and in the next episode we'll be looking at the general overview in VE Pro with all the specific sounds.